StraightallDay.com.
You are now tuned in to the show where you learn the discipline to show up day after day to do the work, the confidence to put yourself out there boldly and authentically, and the mental toughness to continue showing up, doing the work, putting yourself out there, even when the success you've expected to achieve is yet to be achieved. And on top of all this, you get a huge dose of personal initiative, which is the go-getter energy that moves any one of us, and especially you, to go and make things happen instead of waiting for things to happen. We put all this together into one framework, one philosophy. We wrote a hardcover book on this subject. We created a whole system around it that anybody can follow. We have a university that you can now enroll in, and you are listening to the daily masterclass that is called Work on Your Game. My name is Dre Baldwin, also known as Dre All Day, and welcome to the show. If you're listening to this right now and you have not yet left a review of this show on the Apple Podcasting app, please leave a review of the show on Apple Podcasts and a rating, and let us know, let the aggregators know, and also let other listeners know that this is the place to get this game every single day, the daily game, the Work on Your Game show. All that said, today's topic is transitioning from player to coach. Now, with this specific topic, I am not talking specifically about becoming a sports coach or a life coach. I don't necessarily mean that your job title needs to be coaching. That is not my job title. What I mean is going from being the performer, the superstar performer in whatever stage or platform you happen to have been on, to being the person who's maybe a little bit more behind the curtains, who helps other people become the performers and become the players. And this is not as easy of a transition as it may sound. And this is something that a lot of it is mental and some of it is skill based, but a lot of it is mental. And that's what we're going to talk about here today, is transitioning from being that star who's on the front lines that everybody's watching you, to being a person who may be a little bit behind the scenes and you're helping other people become those stars and they get to do their thing. For example, I was just watching, by the time you listen to this, it already happened, but Roy Jones Jr. and Mike Tyson were scheduled to have a boxing match right after Thanksgiving in 2020. I'm recording this before then. But when Roy Jones was on the Joe Rogan show, one of the podcasts that I listened to that I mentioned in my episode on that, Roy was talking about how he's now a boxing trainer. So he took his skills that he did in boxing. And those shows I listened to was episodes number 1637 and 1638, by the way, where I talked about the podcast I listened to. But Roy was talking about transitioning, actually not transitioning, but what it's like to be a boxing trainer, how he trains fighters, and how he was being asked, Joe was asking Roy, hey, do you train fighters to fight like you? Do you try to teach them to be the way that you are? And he was explaining how he does his thing as a trainer. So he's just a person that was fresh in my mind when it comes to this very thing, going from the player to the coach. Or a guy like Floyd Mayweather, who I don't think he's been on Joe Rogan. It'd be great to have him on Joe Rogan. But I heard him on this other podcast called Drink Champs, which is not one that I listen to a lot, but depending on who they have on there, I will listen. And Floyd was talking about himself being a boxing trainer and training other fighters and things like that, and talking about, hey, here's how I train them, here's how I teach them, here's the things that I give them. So again, I'm not talking specifically, however, about being the person that does it, but helping other people do it. I'll give you an example. There's a guy named Tucker Max, who used to be, well, he is still, I suppose he's still an author. I mean, I guess you could be an author forever. You don't have to retire from being an author, but he wrote several best-selling books. And now he has a company called Scribe, where authors can learn from him and his team the frameworks for how to write their own books. I don't know how good they are, but I do get their emails and I see the content that they put out. And they do cover many of the topics that people need addressed when it comes to writing and publishing a book. Even if you don't work with them directly, they offer a lot of free material and things like that on how to get your book out there. So he went from being the player, who was the author writing books, to being a coach and helping other people write books, which doesn't mean he can't still play, but it seems like the majority of his energy right now is going into how he coaches and shows other people how to do it. And I don't even think he probably even calls himself a coach. Maybe he does, but that's not the point. Again, it's not about the title. It's about what you're actually doing as your work nowadays. How do you make this transition? Any of you right now who is in a position of being the player, being the performer, the star right now, and you're looking at maybe the end of that line, or looking at, hey, how can I put myself in a position where I can still generate a return on investment, I can still generate revenue, but I don't have to do all the performing myself, which is a question that everyone eventually is going to have to ask themselves, because you're not going to be able to do all the work on your own forever. This masterclass today, I'm going to offer you a framework for how you can start making that transition. Point number one, the topic once again is how to transition from player to coach. Number one, you have to be, at least in some part, in whole or in part, you got to be done in the game to ever fully move on. You got to know that you've done what you needed to do, what you have needed to do as a performer, as that leading role individual, before you will ever be mentally equipped to move on. Now, again, it doesn't mean you can't come back and do your thing, but how are you going to train other boxers to be great boxers if you still have something in you that says, I need to get out there, I need to get in the ring, and I need to get in the boxing match? If you still have that in you, then there's no way you're ever going to be able to give your best to the people who are entrusting you to train them. If you still believe you need to write books and get yourself established as an author, how are you going to help other people put their books out and make sure that they get the best out of themselves for their book if you're still even if there's just a little piece of your mind focused on you getting your next book out and making sure that it sells as many copies as it needs to sell or wins whatever awards? You ever seen an athlete retire from their sport and then they come back a year or 2 or 3 later? The reason this happens is because that athlete didn't get all of the game out of themselves yet. They still have some part inside of them that wants to be the performer. Therefore, they are not yet equipped to become the coach. And understand that you will never thrive as a person who is behind the scenes as long as you still feel the need to be seen in front of the scene. You get what I'm saying there? I use 2 different forms of scene there. Those of you, I think everybody here understands the English language well enough to know what I did there. You can't thrive behind the scenes as long as you still need to be at the front of the scene. So how do you get done in the game? How do you get to this point where you're all right with no longer being on the front of the scene and you're okay with stepping behind the scene? Well, you got to know that you left it all on the floor, as we say in sports. You got to know that you gave everything that you needed to give. You did everything that you wanted to do. And you have, even if you feel like you didn't, maybe you got injured and you couldn't finish your career, but you had to have closure in your spirit and in your mind that will allow you to move on. There needs to be mental closure that says, okay, I'm good. I did what I need to do in this space. I'm ready to move on to doing something else. And it has to be in your spirit, not just in your words. Because listen, athletes all the time say that they're done and then they come back, right, because they weren't really done. So you got to make sure you got it all out of you and that your spirit is at peace with the fact that you're no longer going to be the person on the stage doing all the performing and you can let somebody else take that spot. For example, I don't watch wrestling, but I saw just recently, because it was such a big deal, that a wrestler by the name of The Undertaker, and this is in November 2020, I guess he wrestled in his last wrestling match and he had been in wrestling. The Undertaker was in wrestling back when I used to watch wrestling. I used to watch wrestling in the 90s. So this dude has been in the game for a minute, and because of the uniform that he always wore, he always looked the same. You couldn't even tell what his face looked like or anything. I don't think I even heard the guy speak. But he finally wrestled in his last wrestling match, and it was a big deal, and they were treating him like this professional athlete who was retiring. And I guess wrestling is, I guess, kind of sort of professional sports. That kind of wrestling is kind of a little bit of a show, a little bit of acting, and a little bit of physical stuff, because you are fucking your body up when you're out there wrestling. So I'm sure The Undertaker has the battle scars to prove it. But the whole point is he was walking away from wrestling. Now, assuming that he's done, he really is done, and he really won't come back, that's the closure that he had to have. He had to have come to some level of closure, a high level of closure in his spirit to be able to walk away and move on and hopefully not come back to wrestling because he felt like he needs to do more. So it's nothing like, I want to tell any of you who's never been in the position of being that performer, that frontline individual, there is nothing like being the person on stage, being the front person on stage, the star of the show. There is no other area of life that will give you that feeling that you would get by being that front person. That pull is very strong. So you got to make sure you have it all out of you and you've done everything you need to do in that space, so you're okay with no longer being that person who is still going after that and still doing all the things that you want to do in that space. For example, I'll give you another example, a metaphor for this. In episode number 103, the topic was how to stop chasing ass and find your focus. This one was specifically made for the males out there, the heterosexual males who want to know, how can I, because I had athletes, especially athletes, but just young men, period, always ask me, Dre, how can I want to focus on my business, I want to focus on my career, I want to focus on school and do what I need to do for my achievement in life. But at the same time, I'm looking at these girls, I'm focusing on these females. How do I find a balance between the two? Because as men, anatomically, there are needs that you want to fulfill just being a man sexually, but at the same time you have these achievements that you want to accomplish. How do you strike that balance? And one of the things that I said in that episode, and you can go listen to it yourself, is you need to make sure you've done all you needed to do in that space. And that doesn't mean you get to the point where you're like, all right, I'm never having sex again the rest of my life. What I mean is you go ahead and explore yourself, explore that life, explore the females, do everything you're going to do and get it all out of you to the point that you're not preoccupied while you're working thinking, damn, man, I could be out talking to a girl right now. I could be on TikTok, or I could be on, not TikTok, what's the other one? I forgot what those apps are even called. But one of those apps where you can date. What's the thing? Tinder. That's Tinder, not TikTok. I could be on Tinder. I could be on Bumble. I could be on whatever other apps are out there these days. I don't even know. I could be on Instagram talking to these girls right now instead of doing this work. But see, if you get all your energy out of you, and you go mess with all the girls that you want to mess with and indulge yourself, do everything. Make sure you protect yourself, but indulge yourself. Then you can go and do your work and you're not worried about, damn, maybe I haven't talked to as many girls as I need to. Maybe I haven't gone and tried to meet as many females as possible, because you've done it already. You've gotten a lot of it out of your system. So you're okay with focusing on doing this thing because you've done what you need to do in doing that thing. That's what I mean by having that spiritual, it wouldn't necessarily be closure when it comes to something like that, but you've satisfied yourself to the point that you're not preoccupied with that all the time. You can focus on something else, at least for enough period of time to get your focus in and really get some serious work done. Point number 2, today's topic is transitioning from the player to the coach. Number 2, reinvent your mentality to that of deriving your value from helping others get on and prosper. So your mindset is going to change from doing the thing yourself and getting all the attention because of what you did, to where you get all your value and you get your satisfaction from helping other people do it, and you feel happiness by seeing that you played a small role or a big role in them achieving their success. In other words, you go from being the king to being the king maker. Instead of being the person who everybody's paying attention to, you help other people become the one that everybody's paying attention to. So you go from being on the scene to behind the scenes. Now again, as we touched on in point number 1, this requires you to have some closure yourself from being the person with all the attention and putting a little bit of your ego aside, because there's very few coaches out there who get as much attention as the players. All right? And in some areas, the coaches do. Maybe in college football or college basketball, the coaches are bigger stars than the players a lot of times, because the players come and go so quick. The coaches are the ones that people get to know. But aside from that, aside from being a college sports coach, at least in those 2 sports, the person on the scene is often the one getting the most attention. Now, you're still going to have your own power. Right? When you're the person who's helping people become stars and you're helping people get on and you're working behind the scenes, there's some power that you have within that as well. But understand, you as the coach can't be competing with your players for the spotlight. If you're competing with your players for the spotlight, there's going to be a problem, and that's not going to work the way that it should work, because you're never going to be giving your best to helping somebody else become the star if you still feel a little bit of a need to grasp the spotlight for yourself. Because as human beings, we have a limitation. We can't give more than 100% of ourselves. So if 10% of you is focused on you as a star and 90% on helping other people, then somebody else who give 100% is just a better option for everybody that you're working with, because you're not giving all of yourself to them. You're still holding a little bit back to keep for yourself. And that's unfair to the people who have entrusted their success or their growth to you, helping them get there. If you're not willing to give everything you got to help them, but you're still focusing even just a little bit on you. Now, you still have power, again, as I said, but as a coach, you can't be competing with your players for the spotlight. I mentioned Roy Jones earlier, the boxer. Those of you who don't know who Roy Jones is, he's a boxer, was one of the, actually, while he was fighting for many years, was recognized as the greatest pound-for-pound fighter out there. Really great showman as far as what he did as a boxer. Now, Roy Jones started boxing it was before the ubiquitous media age. So a lot of his fights, you can still find probably most of them online, but I'm sure there's some Roy Jones fights you can't even find online simply because the video wasn't there quite yet. So Roy Jones is a little bit ahead of that. I would say somebody like in Floyd Mayweather's category, that's when we start having video for damn near everything. But Roy Jones is a little bit earlier than Floyd. They had a little bit of overlap, but he's a little bit older. But again, the reason I'm mentioning Roy Jones is because he was talking about the fact that he was trained to fight by his father. Now, his father had been a boxer. I believe his father had been a boxer. He was definitely a boxing trainer. And Roy Jones said he couldn't have his father be his boxing trainer, even though his father's the one who introduced him to the sport, and he obviously has some traits of his father. But he couldn't have his father be his boxing trainer because, according to Roy, his father was trying too hard to keep all of the fighters that his father trained kind of under a certain level. He was trying to keep them all under his ceiling, and there was a certain level of attention or a certain level of showiness or a certain level of showmanship or a certain level of performance or a certain way of performing that Roy Jones's father, Roy Jones Sr., just wouldn't allow any fighter that he was training to get to. And Roy said he recognized that at a young age, like in his late teens, and he had to break from dealing with his father and find a different trainer simply because his father would have held him back from becoming who Roy Jones Jr. actually became. So you as the trainer, as the coach, as the whoever, whatever you want to call yourself, the behind the scenes guy, you got to be okay with still being valuable, but not necessarily getting all the attention for it. You're valuable and you're helping people out, but it's not like all the reporters are running to you after every performance. They're running to the performer, and you're the person who gets to play the background, and you got to be okay with not getting all that attention. And not everybody's okay with that. Point number 3, topic today is transitioning from player to coach. Develop your own frameworks and processes that you can teach to others. Now, here's the tangible part that makes you actually functionally good going into that coaching realm. You're going to be the one teaching other people. You got to have frameworks in place and processes that you can teach to other people so someone else can learn what you're teaching. Now, if it's all just in your head, you can teach that way. The problem is you limit yourself because you have to one-on-one, hands-on teach everything that you know to each person. And the problem is you might not remember what you told them before. And the problem is your process is not repeatable and duplicatable because you haven't documented it. You haven't made a framework out of it. Therefore, you may be telling different people different things depending on what you remember or don't remember from day to day. And now you're not getting uniform results. And if you're not producing consistent results, then people are not going to consistently want to deal with you. This is why frameworks matter so much. This is why having a process and a system matters so much if you're going to be teaching other people anything that you do. So this could have been the first point of this whole topic, but I wanted to focus on the mentality and the spiritual mental side of it first. But this right here is the practical application. This is the skill. If you're going to teach what you know, if you're really good at something and you want to teach it to other people, the 2 words that I want you to keep in mind are frameworks and process. The process is you telling people step number 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, and these should be uniform, meaning anyone can follow these steps and they're going to produce results X. The framework is, okay, the way that this works is we're going to do this first, then we're going to do this, then we're going to do this. Those are not necessarily the steps, the action steps, but it's people understanding these are the things that you're going to have in place. So for example, the work on your game, this show, very show, the framework I give you every day, discipline, confidence, mental toughness, personal initiative. Those aren't actually action steps that you're going to take because there's no action step for those things, but that's the framework of what this show is about. Even though we talk about many things like this right here, is us talking about something that can be tangibly applied in the business world and the work world, but it's still underneath the framework of what work on your game is about. And the entire work on your game system takes those 4 elements, and then we take it to mindset, strategy, accountability, action, and communication. So you have to have those frameworks and processes in place, and it goes right in hand with what I just said. When you have the frameworks and processes in place, then you can show people a strategy. Then you can hold them accountable because the framework is in place to show them where they need to be and what they need to be doing. They can take action because they have a plan. And then you got to be able to communicate it. And they'll be able to communicate it because you taught them the framework. So this is how to work on your game system. That's the framework. Those 4 that I told you, and then those 5 that I added on top of that. And when you join Work on Your Game University at workonyourgameuniversity.com, the very first thing you're going to do is go through the entire Work on Your Game system, which is that framework that I just explained. So developing your frameworks and processes allows you to teach to other people and allows you to teach many people at once. So this is the practical application that you do need. And if you're going to be a coach or a teacher, you need something to teach, and you need a process for teaching it. Something to teach and a process for teaching it. Now, it doesn't have to be the same thing every time because your audience changes, and maybe you need to tell your audience more than one thing. For example, this show right here, I tell you different things every day, but they are all underneath the framework. But there needs to be some process in place. And I'm continuing my thought here. There needs to be some process in place that makes what you teach duplicatable for you and explainable by you, even by other people, so that you can enroll others in learning from you. So, for example, on this show, I usually give you 3 tips or 3 points that I'm giving you each episode. But how those points get applied change based on who it's for. All right, so some of you listening to this right now, maybe you are the student and you're trying to evaluate your coach or trainer. Some of you are the trainer and you're trying to evaluate yourself. And some of you are the performer right now, and you know that eventually you're going to transition out of performing into training, and you're listening and taking notes on this because you're like, oh, that makes sense. That's something that I am going to need in place. Let me start working on that right now. Maybe some of you have already transitioned into training and you're not quite getting the results that you want to get. And now you're realizing why, because some of these things are missing. Some of these elements are not in place. Maybe you're thinking about joining Work on Your Game University, and now that I told you what you get, now you're like, oh, okay, now I get it. Now I need to join here so I can get that system. Hopefully that last one is actually true. All that being said, let's recap today's class, which is transitioning from being a player to being a coach. And again, this is not specifically about becoming a coach in any specific role. You don't have to have the title of coach. What we're talking about here is transitioning from being a person on the front lines to the person on the back. Point number one, you got to be done in the game, at least in some capacity, so you can fully move on to the point that you can give to someone else who's trying to get in the game. This is why you see athletes retire and come back, because they haven't gotten all the gas out of their tank. So you got to make sure you left it all on the floor, and understanding that there is nothing like being the front person on the stage. You got to get it all out of you so that you have closure and you can move on. Number two, reinvent your mentality to that of deriving value from helping other people get on and prosper instead of just helping yourself. You're going from being a king to being a king maker, on the scene to behind the scenes. And understand that being behind the scenes, you still have value and you still can get attention, but you're not going to get as much attention as the people who are out there performing. You got to be all right with that. And point number three, develop your own frameworks and processes that you can teach to other people. This is the practical application. This is the skill that you will need if you are going to work with other people and teach them what you know. To be a coach or a teacher, you need two things: something to teach and a process for teaching it. And I'll give you a third bonus thing. You need the communication skills for actually giving it to people. Because if you can't communicate what you know, then nobody else can ever learn from it. So you can have your frameworks in place. Your framework is the overall idea of what you're doing. The system are the actual tangible steps of what people are going to be taking. I'm going to do a whole workshop on this in Work on Your Game University, probably in early 2021. In one of our monthly workshop trainings. If you want to know about that and you want to make sure that you are there and involved, it is for members only, but you can become a member very easily. Just go to workonyourgameuniversity.com, choose your level, and get with us, because we are in there, we are working, we will help you work on your game, show your game, and get paid for your game. If you're ready for that, join us, workonyourgameuniversity.com. Work on your game. Dre all day.